everybody, and welcome to another episode of Cannabis Tech Talks. My name's Adam Saldaña, Senior Video Editor and Media Maestro here at Cannabis and Tech today. It's my first time hosting, and we actually have a very special guest with us today, Danny Murr-Sloat, Master Cannabis Cultivator and co-founder of AlpinStash, a small family-owned sustainable cannabis grow in Lafayette, Colorado. How's it going, Danny?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Doing as well as I can be, man. Just trying to stay safe in this these crazy times. Yesterday was 420. So how was your 420 yesterday?
Ours was pretty good. We actually, got work done from home, and that's always nice when that happens. And both my wife and I are new parents, so this is probably our chillest 420 to date.
Right. Oh yeah.
Yeah, the weather was warm here. We just got over a big snowstorm, so we kind of spent the day outside just hanging with the family. So it was awesome.
Yeah, no, nice. It's crazy now with I know you're in right outside of Boulder, right? Lafayette or Louisville. Yeah. Where is it at?
So our business is in Lafayette. I live in Longmont, so
nice.
Pretty close. Yeah.
Yeah, so I know I'm over here in Illinois and we're still on lockdown. I heard Colorado is about to be off of the lockdown here this weekend. Is that correct? Or
yeah, I think starting May 1st, they're going to open limited businesses. There's a whole long plan. We actually watched the governor's speech yesterday, and they've got, there
extensive.
Was like science for hours, it seemed like, on how they're staging things up. But we're going to try to get it going. For my family, though, it'll probably be, we've been pretty good at isolating. We'll probably stay like that for a while.
Yeah. Well, so for our listeners that don't know much about AlpinStash, and really, I actually had the opportunity with one of our editors to actually go visit you guys when I was living in Colorado to see the AlpinStash grow facility, and you took us around and showed us like a really cool tour. So I'll make sure to leave a link below in our on our YouTube page, and kind of showed like the ins and outs of that, but. Really, kind of tell our viewers a little bit about you and maybe how you kind of started in the cannabis business, maybe like before you started growing.
Yeah, totally. So shortly after I turned 21, I had pretty bad stomach pain. I suddenly woke up with it, went to the hospital, was hospitalized for, I think, 4 or 5 days, kind of was unresolved. And they released me with a prescription for Vicodin. And doctor's appointments to follow up. During that following up and testing, they couldn't really figure out what was going on, so they just kept the prescription going. After a few months of that, I at the time was seeing a gastroenterologist, and they kind of scratched their head and they said, we don't know what's going on. Maybe you should go see a pain doctor. So I saw a pain doctor. This was in, I think, 2003. And his first thing to do was to put me on fentanyl. So I switched. Back then, I certainly didn't know what it was. And now it's pretty much everybody knows what it is. But back then it wasn't, the information wasn't the same. So I switched from, a couple of Vicodin a day to fentanyl, both the instant release lollipops and the patches, the time release patches. And then of course with that was, more testing, and it was really big into injection therapies. So, trying to different nerve blocks in different areas to see if we could get things under control.
So they didn't even have a diagnosis really. They were just trying to figure out, and they were giving you all these like stuff before they even really had a diagnosis. And
it was just, exactly.
Man, that's crazy. And I know I bet a lot of people go through stuff like that all the time. I mean, like the opiate epidemic is obviously huge, but like, I know you're probably not alone in that situation. That's crazy. So they just started they giving you fentanyl and you said oxy too, you said?
No, that came later, but there was fentanyl comes in an immediate release form and an extended release form. And I was
the lollipops, that's what you said.
And the patches are the extended. So I remember the conversation I had with the pain doctor. He said, well, right now we're treating you with a little hammer for pain, but we could use the big hammer if you want. And I was like, well, I don't want to be in pain, so I'll the big hammer, I didn't know. I mean, he didn't say the big hammer is this, and this is what this does, and this is what the long-term outlook was like. It was just, so, yeah, I mean, certainly these days over the last few years with this opiate epidemic, that route of prescription leading to issues, dependency, addiction, whatever, is much more well known and recognized. But back then, I don't know how it wasn't, but I don't think it was.
Right. And even
today,
yeah,
today you would never go to a pain doctor if they were any good and go from a couple of Vicodin a day to fentanyl. There's just no way. I mean, it's not even labeled for that use. It's, it's more for like end stage cancer pain and things like that, not just like undiagnosed, painful, but not, debilitating, crippling pain.
And even just being like just being a young guy in your 20s and like just not knowing what's going on, it's just one of those things. It's like, yeah, man, just not, you kind of learn as you go too. I know I'm just getting a little older too now, but just you kind of learn and just get more experience about learning and hearing stories like that and other people's experience. So yeah, there wasn't really a lot of knowledge on that front, even 10, 20 years ago. So yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, not at all. And I have a history of pretty bad asthma as a kid. So I've been around and treated by a lot of doctors that were very ethical, very trustworthy. So I kind of grew up in the mindset of doctors are ethical and trustworthy and they know what they're doing and they're doing it for you. And I learned that, in retrospect, that that's not always the case. And, unfortunately is, and sometimes not even often the case. I've learned that doctors are like people. There are some that are really good and they're in it for the right reasons and are fantastic people. And there are some that are really greedy and selfish and in it for the wrong reasons. And you hear about those in the news, with the pill farms and things like that. And there's a whole range in between. So that I mean, it was an eye-opening experience in a lot of ways, but certainly with that.
So we're kind of like in the middle of this, and so like you're getting prescribed all this. You're probably like stuck at home this whole time and all doped up off the stuff. Like, so kind of what was your experience with that? Like, how did that?
Yeah, so I sort of liken it to a lobster in a pot of water. It was such a gradual descent into a pretty terrible time that I didn't even realize, how bad things had gotten with in terms of, how medicated I was and how much of an opiate haze I was in, how much all my behavior had changed, how much my, rationality and decision making, all that stuff. It was just such a gradual transition. But by the time it was bad, I didn't have, I kind of didn't know it. But eventually I was pretty much homebound, going really socially isolated, going from doctor's appointment to doctor's appointment, having different procedures and testing done. And actually what had happened is eventually I developed a couple of years into this, I developed a nerve impingement problem issue in my like upper arm or upper neck that kind of affected my whole arm. And in retrospect, what I believe is I was in such a kind of deep opiate sleep so often that I feel like over a course of a couple of years of doing that, just sleeping on one side, not turning, I, kind of compressed that area of my body. So I had treatment for that. I had a number of surgeries for that. And pretty soon I was, taking prescriptions for the side effect of the prescriptions that I was taking prescriptions for the side effects of those, and, was in a pretty terrible state. I pretty much didn't leave my room except for doctor's appointments, and, had to take medicine to wake up, take medicine to go to sleep. And it was pretty bad time. In that time, in 2009, I had become pretty desperate. I also had a non-cancerous base of skull tumor that had a pretty major surgery to remove. So I was pretty hopeless. And my dad, again, this is in 2009, medical cannabis had just sort of become accessible to, the general public. And so my dad suggested actually that I go get my red card, my medical card, and see how that would would do for me.
Yeah.
So it's funny. I actually went and saw my regular doctor. I just happened to have my medical marijuana appointment later that day. I was seeing my regular doctor. My regular doctor had been my doctor since I was 13. Told me at that appointment, you either need to go to drug rehab therapy or we're not going to treat you anymore. That was pretty bad for me to hear because I felt like my issues stemmed from legitimate pain problems and not, drug addiction, strictly drug addiction problems. So I left that appointment, happened to go get my medical cannabis card later that day. And then, there was a process of getting that. And within a couple of months, started using medical cannabis. And within a few months after that, had gotten myself off all the opiates and, began to get my life back together.
Yeah, that's that's super crazy. You hear a lot of the stories like you're saying, people kind of just transitioning because you weren't a regular user like most of your whole life until like this, like you said, you were kind of really desperate with the medical benefits of cannabis and some of those aspects. It's funny too, you said like your dad was the one of all people, usually like parents. I know some people, everyone has a different family dynamic and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting that your dad was he just knowledgeable about it, or had he kind of experienced some use and kind of just wanted to kind of advise you in that, or
Yeah, so I was really lucky. Both my parents are really chill when it comes to that. My dad was actually a drug defense attorney in the '70s and worked
oh
helped
cool.
start Colorado and NORML and worked to hard to get legalization at that point. He had been a pretty regular user, but had stopped. Probably a couple of years after I was born. My mom
Yeah.
was a hippie. And so they were both, and where I live in the country, Boulder at the time, at least, was very, it was pretty socially acceptable.
Yeah.
Um, and so, and in terms of my use, I had smoked in high school a little bit after that, but later, and especially with the opiates, I had bad experiences. And so I was not a regular user and I hadn't for a long time. And I was pretty hesitant because of the bad experiences I had and times I had recently ingested. And so for me, it was sort of like almost like an out of desperation that I even did try it. And the interesting thing in all of this is I came to find out a little later that opiates are not even really supposed to be prescribed to undiagnosed muscle pain, because if you don't know the cause of action, they actually you get into a cycle of them creating more pain.
Right.
If you don't know if there's a pain problem in your body and you're not fixing that, your body can actually devote more of that nerve pathway to pain signals, so your pain will actually intensify. And then also with the stagnation, the physical stagnation that comes with, being in that state, it's not good for anybody to lay down,
Yeah.
18 hours a day. So as I used cannabis to treat my pain and I got off the opiates, cannabis obviously is very useful for pain, but just getting off the opiates was a big
Yeah.
factor for clearing up that pain in the first place.
Yeah, just changing up your lifestyle, like you said. I bet just being more active and, like you said, social life. I mean, it's
Yeah.
great. Like you said, if people don't really think about stuff like that, but obviously cannabis is one of the most social, aspects too. Just and then being able to get out. So so then after you kind of like started getting in, how did you get into growing a little bit? Like,
Yeah. So actually, back then in 2009, it was pretty much like the Wild West here in Colorado for dispensaries.
right,
So
right.
I went to the first dispensary I saw because it was the one that it's across the street from CU, the college. It had a giant neon sign, said Dr. Reefer with an arrow. Some of them were more discreet, but I didn't know where they were. So I just went to the one that was, huge sign, and they gave clones away free with purchase. So
Oh,
I walked off of my first few purchases with plants.
interesting.
I've always enjoyed gardening and growing plants. I had been using that as sort of like a therapy, something to do, container gardening at that point.
Hmm.
So coming home with these plants, I was like, well, I'll grow them and see what happens. And then
Yeah.
as cannabis really started to fix and enhance my life, I really started putting energy into taking care of these plants and imagined a future in which this could be actually a career as well. So I used growing as a therapy. And for me, the actual aspect of growing was as therapeutic as ingesting cannabis in the first place. It gave me, a hope for my future. It gave me something to get up and do during the day. It gave me something to be responsible for, and just sort of, uh, the ingesting of cannabis spiritually and psychologically helped plug me back into life. But the growing of cannabis did that much as well, and forced like a physical aspect in there too, which I'd always been a pretty physically active person. And, so it was something to get me back up and moving and working, lifting things, was really, really important.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, like you said, when I first heard your story, back like a little over a year ago, I was just like, wow, this is so inspiring. I know a lot of people can connect with just that aspect of like being misdiagnosed or having some kind of, you hear about it all the time, and then also that route you took of like using the growing as your therapy, that really stuck with me because yeah, people just need to find a hobby that they love. I'm always a proponent of I work with photography and video and work with stuff too. It's like you have to kind of have a passion and wake up and kind of have interest in what you do every day. And like you said, if you're just laying around and kind of, it really affects your life, and doing some, or even a job that you don't really like and stuff like that. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've spent a lot of time reflecting on how I got to where I am, and if I was to give advice to somebody. And one of the things that I think is extraordinarily important is having a passion and having a goal and having it be something that you truly believe is achievable. So for me, that was, I had spent my 20s in such a poor state that I didn't really have any, you know, professional or career future or anything in mind. And this idea that if I learned how to grow cannabis really high quality and something that I put my heart and soul in, naturally kind of being predisposed to the craft mindset, that I could actually have a future, that was incredibly motivating. And so I had that motivation as well as the passion and the enjoyment in working with plants as well. So I think, like you said, that's so important for people's recovery, and I think it's often overlooked.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. Especially with recovery, just having something like you said, just a total lifestyle change. But so before we go any further, and I really want to dive more into some of your like very famous strains and like cultivars and into like you said, we're just kind of getting started in your story about how you started growing. But right now you have some of these amazing strains, and your craft cannabis is like renowned in Colorado. I mean, I remember a couple of times I went to the dispensary and it was all sold out. So before we go any further, we're going to take a quick little break, and we'll dive in a little more deeper with Danny Murr-Sloat.
Hey everyone, thanks again for tuning in to this episode of Cannabis Tech Talks. Real quick, this episode is sponsored by Cannatrac. Cannatrac has created an ecosystem for the entire cannabis industry and beyond. Now you can go completely cashless with the Canna Card, a digital payment system combined with loyalty and rewards that simplifies the payment process for retailers and alleviates the burden by operating in an all-cash environment. For more info, be sure to check out www.cannatrac.com.
Welcome back to Cannabis Tech Talks. We're here with Danny Murr-Sloat, master cannabis cultivator of AlpinStash, and we're talking about craft cannabis and some of the art of craft growing. Cannabis really changed the life of not only a lot of people, but Danny here specifically, with him growing and just starting to use with some of his ailments in early life. But yeah, so Danny, coming back to dive right back in, what I wanted to talk a little bit more about something that really stood out to me when I got to go visit you guys was like kind of the passion and art you guys have there at AlpinStash. I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of like that art of growing. Can you kind of touch a little bit, and like the quality of your cannabis, obviously coming from that? Can you kind of touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, this ties into, how cannabis helped me, but it was such a passion of mine that, and I put so much effort into learning how to do it in a way that I believe is the right way, and the pursuit of quality, which really is one of the driving factors of not only me and my wife who runs AlpinStash with me, but our employees as well, all two of them. So really from the get-go, it was a labor of love and a passion project. And like I said earlier, I'm predisposed to craft things. I am lucky in the part of the country I live in that's a pretty sustainable and respected sector of any business. And so I realized early on that there was no way that I was going to be a giant mega corporation. And so in order to survive as a business, as a business creating something, it would have to be that craft niche, which is also where a lot of our passions lay. So we just devoted ourselves to that mindset and that model from the beginning, and really, that has been very helpful for us. There's, as dispensaries sort of and grows kind of come together, and you get these big corporations out of it, there'll always be the room for the craft producers.
Right. And I remember hearing last time when we met, hearing your story, didn't you kind of started growing at some of those like large facilities where they're kind of just churning out like grow ops, like huge grow ops like that. And then kind of, like you said, you kind of wanted to stick to more of the small quality, like craft, like you said. Is that correct?
Yeah. So my initial job was for a grow for what is a large facility, and it's not necessarily the size of the facility, but it's also the mindset of the people that run it. Obviously,
the management, yeah,
the management and ownership. So the place that I started was definitely a quantity mentality, and it was soul sucking, and you'll hear a lot of growers that are in this for the passion. They get their soul sucked out of them, and most of them have to leave the industry. So after that job fell through, and I actually left pretty quickly within a few months because it was just terrible, and it was at the startup, and it was like, if it's this bad now, it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, you got to get out now while you can. Yeah,
that's good,
though.
Absolutely.
Like you said, and the timing of it, like that had to be, because like Colorado is just, I mean, it was obviously the California and Colorado are a little ahead of the game there, so that's perfect. You got your foot in the door kind of right then. So
yeah, so that was, I think, in 2010 when I left that. I decided to go to pursue this to pursue starting my own facility pretty seriously. So I started taking horticulture classes and just learning as much as I could. I got a job in the selling equipment and supplies at an indoor grow store. Then as AlpinStash sort of began to take off, I left that to focus on working out, making AlpinStash reality full time. Got another job at a family friend's grow. This one was small. It was actually smaller than ours, but it was also just terrible ownership, terrible management. And I realized, even more strongly, like, this is a really longtime family friend that I'm being treated this way with somebody, that I at least should have a little bit better of a history with. Like, I am ordered to do this the way that I want to, so that I can do this as my profession and not have my soul sucked out of me. I really have to focus on doing our own thing. So we were able to get licensed at the end of 2014 and started growing plants in 2015.
Nice. Yeah, like I said, when I was out there visiting, one of the things that really stood out was all the different like phenotypes you had. Mm-hmm. I mean, not just like different strains, and I know you crossbreed and you kind of experiment a little bit with the breeding, and so that really stuck out with me, because as a consumer, I kind of look for, as any consumer does, like looks for the different flavors and smell, and obviously all the different characteristics that that their favorite. So I kind of wanted to talk to. I got my hands on actually I went to Colorado Harvest,
Mm-hmm.
and this was a little over a year ago. Like right after I visited your grow op there, I was like, I got to get my hands on some of these strains, and so I went to Colorado Harvest, and I think they only had a little bit of the Donatello that that you guys grew there.
Yeah.
It's not your specific strain, correct? But
Yeah, so that's actually one of the few we grow that isn't ours. And that's a fantastic cultivar. And this is good timing because we just harvested our newest cross with Donatello. We crossed that to our Moxie dog. We call that Orange Chemsicle. So that would be available for purchase sort of at the end of this week, beginning of next week.
oh,
Um,
nice. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Some of those cultivars are amazing. I remember like the Donatello was like really citrusy and had a lot of
yeah.
those, I think you said it was crossed with like purple Urkel and what was the other one it was crossed?
So that one's actually Lavender Diesel crossed with Casey Jones.
Casey Jones. Okay. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
remember the Ninja Turtle correlates
Yeah,
with
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah. And then
Um,
you had like Lemmy Winks and
yep,
like
that's one of our originals.
Barrow
Yeah.
King. And I mean,
Yep,
I
that
just
one.
remember so many of the different and another one that you had mentioned was the Emperor's Breath. I
Yep.
remember you showing us that one, and it was like garlic and mushroomy, like kind of like more savory smelling. You were telling us about that, so like maybe for first one of our for our viewers here, can you kind of describe like kind of how some of those like phenotypes come to and like the experience you had with kind of like learning and falling in love with like breeding and kind of growing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my two passions are quality and the genetics. Variety is the spice of life. If you kind of get into cannabis, you pretty quickly really enjoy experimenting with, all the different terpene profiles and, genetics and all that stuff. So, I spent most of, the first part of my growing experience growing, strains that were commonly available, easy to get a hold of, or some rare stuff too, but just stuff that wasn't ours. And while that's really fun, it becomes for some people like the passion and the addiction becomes seeing what you can create. And so certainly being able to offer that in the commercial space and sort of use that as a way to elevate our own brand and our own company is, while we do have some genetics that aren't ours, the Donatello being one of them, they probably make up less than 10% of what we grow and offer, and really, exploring the different iterations that this plant can take has been super rewarding, and has been also rewarding in a business sense too. So often what we do is we take a mom plant that we really love, and we take a dad plant that has good growth traits, and cross them and see what we come up with. We're a little bit less, for the most part. We definitely have some cultivars in which we have an end goal in mind, but
Right.
in general, we're more about at least the first initial cross, the experimentation of it. So, for example, that Emperor's Breath, which is really savory, like you said, garlic and onions, and we actually call it that because it's like what we imagine the breath of an emperor would be like after a feast.
A feast. Yeah, no, that
Yeah,
was great. I remember smelling it and I was like, oh, I can't. And like I said, when I went, there was only a cut. You guys are so hard to get your hands on those drops. You guys, if you're listening, make sure to get your hands on some of that stuff if you're in Colorado. But yeah,
yeah,
the Emperor and that Emperor's Breath. So it came from two parents that were totally different, right?
yeah, and then just really quickly to your point of the drops, check our Instagram. We have drop information there. But that Emperor's Breath was really surprising. We took the mom is Lemmy Winks. It's one of our original strains that smells exactly like grape Skittles. It's very, very sweet, artificial grape smelling. And then we took the Pug's Breath male that has sort of like a purpley velvet, a little bit earthy smell to it too, and crossed them, and that the resulting terpene profile of savory garlic and onions was such a surprise. Like I had, if you would have asked me, 10 guesses of the terpene profile in the end before we grew it, never would have guessed that. So, I mean, that's just sort of the things that keeps the passion alive, where you're just so surprised and stoked. And then you're like, well, now we have that. Like, what if we cross it to something else? Like, what will that flavor be? What will that growth rate be? So, that's just so much fun
Yeah,
from
no,
our standpoint. And we really, as a company and as a business, like we do what we do because it's what we love and what's what we want to offer. So when we find a passion like Emperor's Breath, and we dive into that and we just embrace it. So we really do what we love.
yeah. So for other growers out there too, I know I kind of wanted to start dabbling a little bit in like a home grow, and I know your YouTube channel is really cool. You kind of take people around all the time, but I know you were telling me a little bit about you were going to start maybe like almost a new kind of do it yourself, like kind of home grow thing. And I mean, right now with everybody stuck inside and just people, the content, I mean, like is so high in demand right now. I think that's like perfect. Like, I know I would tune in to watch something like that. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. So, as a company and as a cannabis business, we actually are really passionate about home grow and about caregiver rights. I think one of the best ways to for your kind of average or starting consumer to understand what what really high quality is, because it might not be accessible, or just what it takes, and the passion is for them to grow it at home. So that's part of the reason why I'm super passionate about that. Obviously, cannabis is and the growing specifically, its benefits for me have just been so great that I support that. But to that end, and part of our ethos is being completely transparent. So we do have that YouTube page where we do have a lot of our grow techniques and tips. So we don't do anything proprietary, and so we just want to share the knowledge that we've gained. And it occurred to us, my wife and I, that with the time in this world being what it is, and being able to be self-sufficient is really a good thing. That we are going to start off a small, just like 1 or 2 plant grow at home, and using it very affordable, doing it very affordably. And we wanted to share that with people. There's so much focus with a lot of videos on, how to produce a ton of quantity, which often that takes a lot of lighting and electricity and expense and air conditioning and all that stuff. We just want to show people how to grow, what they themselves can consume, and do it in a fun and enjoyable way so that it's successful, low stress, and easy. And so that's our next project while we're stuck more or less at home.
Yeah, no, I know it's so crazy. So not to get negative on us here, but like how has business been? You guys, like you said, you guys are still taking care of your plants since the coronavirus. Has it really affected you guys as much? And to the viewers too, just to explain, it's, you guys said you only have 2 employees. It's just you and your wife, right? Like it's a real small, like you said, real love craft cannabis. So
Yeah. So it's my wife and I, and then we have 2 additional employees. So it definitely has, this pandemic has definitely, we've seen a downturn just in the industry initially, or now. Initially, there was a big upswing because everybody thought they were going to get locked down, and everybody went out to buy as much as they could. And there's actually, the funny story is, and especially for your listeners in not legal states, we're considered a critical business here in Colorado. So the cannabis industry is considered as essential as grocery stores and pharmacies. And the first lockdown order happened to the city of Denver. And initially they said they were closing the cannabis businesses, the recreational ones. The medical was going to stay open, but they're closing liquor stores and cannabis businesses. And immediately their lines went out the door for those businesses, and people started going crazy. So within 2 hours, the mayor actually went back on and said, hang on, we're going to let cannabis businesses and liquor stores stay open. So it's that juxtaposition of it being illegal in many parts of the country and the world, and in some states it being considered a critical business, is just so interesting, and I think overall positive. But after that initial surge, just the uncertainty has really, in many assets and sectors of this industry, has kind of put a down turn on things. But with that in mind, we're still doing okay. We had expansion plans. We were in the middle of applying for permits to expand our space, and that's all come to not a halt, but almost a halt, very, very slow. And that part has become a little bit more uncertain. But we do have our businesses afloat. We're able to keep our employees and keep moving forward and stay open. And that is a blessing. And so, while it's not the way that it was beforehand, we're not, we still consider ourselves lucky.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's like a really great milestone. I know we've been talking to a lot of business and people in the industry, and yeah, it's just such a positive thing. Laboratories and even equipment manufacturers, and yeah, it's just a great milestone. Like cannabis, like you said, not too long ago, or even in some places of the country, it was illegal, and now here we are, and it's like deemed essential in a lot of places. So yeah, it definitely makes you feel good. You get that bad stigma and people sometimes working in the industry, but it's good that that we're actually known for helping out and stuff like that too. So
yeah, and it's awesome that our government recognizes, our local government at least,
right.
recognizes the value of cannabis, not only for health, but for people's well-being. And, I will say though that, because we're such a small crew, continuing social distancing at work has been really easy. And we always, as you've been to our facility, being clean is a cornerstone of our business, but we've increased that too. So that's been pretty, overall, It's been easy for us to implement any changes to make it safer.
We'll drop a link in the description here. But yeah, I think when we myself and one of the editors got a chance to jump in, kind of go through your tour, and yeah, we had to get suited up and put all the whole like you said, cross contamination and stuff like that. So yeah, that's good that you guys are obviously practicing that. And yeah, so before I let you go, I just wanted to ask about those last cultivars that you said it will be dropping soon. What are some of those that you said before I let you go here?
Yeah, so we got 3 main ones that are brand new. We got that orange Chemsicle, which I talked about earlier, Donatello Cross. We got one, Integrity Cookies. It's been a project we've been working on since 2018. We're finally have it down now. Huge South Park fans are like hometown heroes. I grew up watching them. So we're really stoked with that one. That's a form cut Girl Scout cookies crossed with our Lemmy Winks, which is also a South Park reference. And then the last one of this new round we're offering is called Cookie Power. It's our Cookie Confundo crossed with a Power Lock. So really excited to release those. And we've got a whole nother round of new genetics coming up after that. So, 2020 and moving forward for us is going to be a lot more new genetics to offer. And again, check our Instagram for drop info. And really quick, I just want to tell people that, if you've got any questions about growing or anything, any way that we can help you, especially during these times, feel free to reach out. We're really accessible over Instagram. And we love helping, and we love, giving people something to do and something to hope for.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, that's great. So again, just tell them where what's your website and your social media, AlpinStash on Instagram. And
yeah, definitely. So our website is AlpinStash.com. Our YouTube channel is AlpinStash. Instagram's @AlpinStash. Email is alpinstash@gmail.com.
Nice. Well, yeah, like I said, I could talk to you all day about the genetics, and I can't wait to hear about some more stuff and actually get my hands on some of those strains and stuff like that. I can't wait to go back out there to Colorado and try to get a hold of you guys. Well, thanks so much for spending time with us today, Danny. It's been a pleasure. And everybody, thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Cannabis Tech Talks. If you like this episode, make sure to share with your friends and subscribe. And also don't forget to check out our social media channel, cannatechtoday.com. And like Danny said, if you're interested in learning about growing or any kind of questions like that, feel free to reach out to them. And everyone stay safe and have a good rest of the day.
Bye.